Hello, my name is Nicholas Morgan. I'm an editor at Aval News, and this is Turkey Abroad. Joining me again this morning is Abdullah Hawez. He is a researcher and an expert on Kurdish politics out of London. Abdullah, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
So the topic that I wanted to talk to you again today about is these intra-Kurdish unity talks that we saw recently in Syria. We had a round take place, I believe, towards the end of February in Qamishli, and it brought together the PYD, which is the main political party for the Kurdish SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, operating in the region. And they had a number of other Kurdish factions join to the meetings. But there was one member that was notably absent for what one representative called unknown reasons, and that was the KNC, the Kurdish National Council. The organizers say that they have no idea why the KNC didn't show up, but of course, there's always a little more to that than meets the eye. So what I want to ask you is, why do you think the talks between the KNC and, say, the PYD or other groups have really broken down at this point?
So the meetings in February actually were with PYD and their allies and with KNC. So there were separate meetings with the two by Americans, with them, the commander of SDF, Mazloum Abdi. So the point of the meeting at the time was preparation for a new stage, right? So, but after that, they supposed to meet after a week, but everything fell apart because now KNC have a couple conditions. First of all, they say the head of the PYD delegation, Aldar Khalil, has accused us of being mercenaries of Turkey, which we are not, so he should apologize. This is one. The second is they say there has been an uptick of arrests in northeast Syria, and this also must stop before the talks resume. And the other side obviously rejects. So for now, the negotiations have stalled for a few months actually. And the prospect of it to restart is not very bright, but it may start if US, because US is involved, and if US puts enough pressure on both parties, they may restart. But from what I heard in the last couple of weeks is that US has asked KNC to, rejoin the meetings without preconditions, but KNC has rejected. So we'll have to see how things will go.
Mm-hmm. On that allegation that they made that the KNC is operating as Kurdish and Turkish mercenaries, rather, they accused the Roj Peshmerga of, being very supportive of Turkey's efforts around the area. What's the story behind those allegations? Is there any basis to them? Where did it come from?
I mean, calling them mercenaries of Turkey is a bit too much. I won't say they are mercenaries of Turkey. They are close to Turkey. And the thing is, Roj Peshmerga, which KNC says it's their arm wing, they are subordinate to KDP in Iraq, the Barzani and the other Barzanis, but they are not Turkish mercenaries. So their principal backer is KDP. So whatever KDP tells them, they'll do that. And KDP is becoming increasingly close to Turkey because of the economic interests that they, connects them with Turkey. So they are close to Turkey. That there is some truth to that. But calling them mercenaries, I think this is not true. They did have. So Roj Peshmerga used to be part of a force called Zeravani. Zeravani is part of the KDP Iraq's force. And Zeravani used to be trained by Turkey for some time in around 2015, but they are not Turkish mercenaries. But regionally, in terms of, let's say, broad regional agendas, they are obviously very close to Turkey.
Speaking, this Turkey just seems to hover in the background, of course, to a lot of all of this. And, this allegation came up again, actually, where last week, we also had the head of the Syrian National Council, which is connected, of course, to Turkey's proxies in Afrin and the other occupied territories in northern Syria. And, Nasser al-Hariri, he shows up in Erbil last week. He comes there talking about the SDF and PKK together as terrorists. And there was some talk even that the SNC had offered that the KNC could set up offices in the occupied territories, including in Afrin. This of course got the expected reaction. It wasn't very well received from what I've been able to see. But would this mean, if they were to go ahead with this, actually, let me backtrack. How realistic is that, or feasible is that proposal in the first place that the KNC would accept? And would that basically mean the end of intra-Kurdish talks at that point?
So the thing with KNC, which is the abbreviation of Kurdish National Council, it's an alliance between several Kurdish parties which are traditionally close to Barzani in Iraq, but there are differences between them as well. A couple of days ago, I was watching this program on their KNC's TV, and it was a very interesting debate between three different members of KNC, and there was clearly a lot of differences between them on Nasser Hariri's visit to Iraqi Kurdistan. So Nasser Hariri is the head of Syrian opposition, which are backed by Turkey. So some of them were saying we shouldn't have, Iraqi Kurds shouldn't have received them in the first place, because basically by receiving them, you are giving them legitimacy. And the other group were saying, no, this is politics, this is diplomacy. We have to try every available option to, somehow try to gain a foothold in Afrin and elsewhere, because the people there need us. And there's another thing among KNC people, they think there's really no much difference between what was happening during PYD in Afrin and what's happening now in terms of ethnic cleansing, which I found very interesting. They were saying during PYD or SDF in Afrin, there were almost 300,000 Kurds left their areas. So the same thing is happening now, another 300,000 has left. So there's really not much difference between what's happening now and what's happening during PYD. So for these people, so this is how they see things. They try to say, okay, we are not happy with what's happening in Afrin, but you are not better. And from what I have seen, most of the heavyweights within KNC are leaning towards Syrian opposition. And so in terms of having a presence in Afrin, they seem to be open to the idea, but they say if we go back, we should be able to protect our own offices. So there should be some sort of, we should have our own guards. So they want some arrangements that will give them some guarantee that the militias close to Turkey won't abuse the power. But I think ultimately this decision comes to Barzani. It's not up to them, because Barzani is basically funding them, giving them whatever they want. And Barzani is basically the person who has support in Syria, not these parties. I think these parties doesn't have a lot of support. The support they have is because of Barzani in Iraq. Mm-hmm. So whatever the ultimate decision when it comes to this is up to Barzani, not to the KNC.
Mm-hmm. What would you say the purpose of al-Hariri's visit to Erbil was also in that case? Because it had a bit of an inflamed reaction from, naturally, the PYD side and a few others, of course, and almost everyone sees him basically as operating as a Turkish proxy.
Yeah.
And it almost comes across as like this wasn't of his own initiative. Was this just Turkey trying to throw sand into gears? Can you give us some clarity on this, or your assessment at least?
I mean, everyone, not only with PYD, even KNC agree Nasser Hariri is basically a Turkish proxy. Even they agree on that. They don't disagree, but they say, okay, here's the thing. Okay, we accept that Turkey is against Kurds, or so as they say, but it's the same with Iran, the same with Iraq, the same with Turkey. We cannot fight all these countries together. We have to find a way to work at least with one of the regional powers. And we prefer Turkey over Iran. So this is how they see it, actually. So for them, they say, yes, Nasser Hariri is a Turkish proxy, but now Iraqi Kurdistan has good relations with Turkey. We can actually capitalize on these good relations for us to gain a foothold in these areas where Turkey is controlling. And they say, okay, what's the alternative? The alternative is that things will get worsen. At least now we can, try to have, let's say, offices, and we can hear to the people, and we can become their voice. This is how they see it. How realistic is that? Probably not very realistic, given how things are on the ground, because these things, it's nice to have, some chat on a TV, but on the ground, things are much messier. You have multiple different militias. Each militia, obviously, they are Turkish proxies, but there are a lot of actually intra-rivalries within the factions themselves. So it's more complicated. And in these areas, the truth is, if you don't have your own force on the ground, if you don't have hard power, you cannot make much difference.
Mm-hmm. And there's two elements in there that that I'd like to go a little further into, and that would be the Iran angle, of course, and the KDP's growing closeness with Turkey. Of the two, I'd like to start actually with the KDP's one, because I found it. I've been trying to keep up with the case against the three journalists that were arrested in the KRG, and they were accused of being PKK operatives. And in our last podcast, we spoke quite a bit about the dynamic between the PKK and the Sinjar agreement, and of course where that ties in with the KRG's position on it. But do you think that as the KRG grows closer to Turkey in this case, given the kind of other allegations against the prosecution of these journalists, that it was politically motivated, and so on, do you think that they're beginning to use the PKK in some ways as sort of like a scapegoat to solve some of their own kind of like domestic quarrels? What do you think?
Yeah, the thing with these journalists is that they are not PKK. I have been following this closely. Actually, they do have a lot of criticism of PKK. This is the thing. They do, but here's the thing that some people, outsiders, may not understand. For Turkey, PKK may be a terrorist organization, but for Kurds, it's a Kurdish movement. It's normal. It's just like KDP, Pkk, and other Kurdish factions. This is how it's seen within the Kurdish population. So, and the thing with PKK, because they are fighting Turkey and there's the biggest Kurdish population is in Turkey, a lot of people actually have a lot of respect for PKK in Iraqi Kurdistan. But having this respect doesn't mean you are PKK, okay? So when it comes to these journalists who were arrested, as you said, they have been used as a scapegoat, but I think KDP has two goals here. First of all, suppressing dissidents and opposition, especially in areas which Barzani sees as his stronghold. For example, one of the leading journalists who was arrested was Sherwani. Sherwani is a tribe. Sherwanis are actually part of the Barzani Confederation. So it's a very sensitive thing for Barzani to have somebody who is tribally very close to them, criticizing them in such a style. So this is one of the things. And another, they are putting this PKK label on them to somehow tell Turkey, see, we are actually clamping down on PKK. So economically and politically, they try to use it as in a way to benefit them in their relations with Turkey. Especially now, we have seen US role, whether we like it or not, is declining. So I think automatically that means Kurdish factions' reliance on regional powers will increase. It's just a natural process. So KDP knows that, and I think the relation for Turkey is very strategic and important for them, because it's basically, it ensures their it ensures their protection in the future in a way. So they are using this to tell Turkey, we are clamping down on PKK and all that. So this is the story of these journalists. But I'm telling you, these journalists, and the funny thing is, the KDP released a video, which they call them confessions from these journalists. They used quite a few photos and other things that supposedly proves their closeness to PKK. But these photos are old, and these journalists have been publishing it on their own Facebook. So there's no secret. And they have been publishing it 10 years ago. For example, they had, one of them had an interview with Jamil Bayek, the PKK leader. He had published it on his Facebook 10 years ago. And now they're using it as a proof that these people are close to PKK, which I find very absurd and completely untrue.
Yeah, I remember seeing that they were accusing them of, basically, they were saying that what is basically on the ground reporting or interviewing, journalistic, tradecraft, etc., they were trying to disguise it as, they were trying to portray it rather as intelligence work, basically on behalf of the PKK, which, I found personally very, very jarring to see. And a lot of international organizations seem to have called them out on it. And this is all happening, correct me if I'm wrong, is the KRG itself is going through a lot of economic troubles on its own that perhaps maybe they're trying to distract from as well, right?
So the thing is, we have, as you said, yeah, there are a lot of economic problems right now, but there is more to it, I would say, than only economy. So since 2019, we have a new prime minister, which is Masroor Barzani. Some people may confuse because it's all ends with Barzani, but there are differences between them. Before that, you had Nechirvan Barzani, which is his cousin. But when it comes to practicalities and some details, they have differences. Especially Nechirvan is more open-minded when it comes to certain things, and he understands you have to keep a certain level of freedoms to have this international support. He was more understanding of these nuances and let's say details. But Masroor is much more, let's say, he's more thick-skinned, and he is much less tolerant of criticism. So since he has come to power, freedoms have actually worsened, deteriorated quite a bit. So this is one of the major reasons for why things are becoming worse. And unfortunately, I also think it has to do with the US role. Automatically, as US role declines, they would become less dependent on Western support, which means they would care less about what the West says about freedoms. I mean, if you are more reliant on Turkey, obviously we know what's going on in Turkey. They don't care about freedoms and any of that. So that would make them, less careful about what the West says. Obviously, they still do, because there's the West, or especially they still have substantial influence in Iraq and in Kurdistan. But it's just a process. I think it's a process that their influence is in decline. For example, 10 or 20 years ago, their influence was much greater.
And speaking of this declining American role and just kind of how it plays into whether it's the dynamics in Syria or the dynamics between the KRG and Turkey, this is all been a much longer process than just say, the easy answer might just be, well, this is the 4 years result of the Trump administration, or this is just a sign that Biden's team is right, that the Middle East isn't even a top 3 priority for them, as one of their members put it. But as the U.S. further retreats from this, it does seem a bit short-sighted that all of the supposed goals that they seem to have, whether it's in Iraq or Syria, they all just seem completely on their mind. by backing away just too soon. And, for a lot of, I know that for a number of Kurds that I spoke to, they saw at least in President Biden somebody who'd be more committed and that won't hand them to the wolves, or that was shorthand for Turkey in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
But what does all this? Do you think that Biden's going to slow down any sort of like decline overall, or do you think it's just going to continue along a pace that's been set before him? Especially with, of course, we have the tension with Iran, which I'll
Yeah.
ask you about next. But
Yeah.
let's stick with Biden.
First of all, the thing with Biden, I was never one of the people who was very optimistic about Biden coming to power and becoming more, the savior of Kurds. It's just, obviously, I understand US has its own interests and they have their own priorities. It's just understandable. But for Kurds, Western support, especially US support, is extremely important because unlike the other countries in the region, Kurds don't have a state. So reliance on Western support is one of the very crucial reasons why you have, for example, a constitutional entity in Iraq. So this is why Kurds really, unlike the other countries in the region, they care much more about what's happening in US because it's just important for them and for existence, especially political existence in the region. But I think, and I have been one of the people who believe US role will naturally decline, given that you have the rise of China in one hand, you have, Russia becoming again more bold in the region. It's just US doesn't, I mean, better, you live in the US, probably you follow it more closely, but in US, there's no much appetite to, involve aggressively in the Middle East. People are not interested in this because they see Middle East as a quagmire, and the more you are involved, the deeper you have to dig the hole. So I understand this sentiment in the US, but one of the problems I think have been that US, first of all, doesn't have a strategy. Obviously, when you don't have a strategy, you just randomly do things. Of course, it's a quagmire. You have to have a timeline and a clear strategy what you do. If you follow it, obviously, it becomes much easier. But US doesn't have that. So I think what's happening and what will happen in the future is really not good for Kurds. This is why you see Kurds are resetting their priority. And obviously, Kurds are not a homogeneous nation. You have different factions, close to different regional countries, which by the way, I understand. For example, in the case of KDP, probably the available options you have is either Iran or Turkey, because your immediate neighbors are Iran and Turkey. And given that you are a weak player, you have to rely on a bigger country in the region. So in the case, for example, of KDP, they have chosen Turkey because economically it's more beneficial, and this is your lifeline to the world. And in the case of, for example, PKK, they tried to have a channel with Iran and their allies in Syria, which is again understandable, because if you are fighting everyone at the same time, this is crazy. You cannot keep up, and it will be bad for your future, and maybe even it may lead to your distraction.
Mm-hmm. This one will then segue right into Iran, because of course, Iran plays a part, whether it's in, just how embedded it is across, like, say, in Iraqi politics or in Syria, or even like giving the US any sort of rationale, however serious it might be, about staying in the region. And we had that war of words between the Turkish ambassador and the Iranian ambassador, and so on, after the failed hostage rescue mission last month and the rocket attack on Erbil. After that, I actually had a podcast episode with Caroline Rose. She's an analyst at New Lines, and she suggested that in the latter case, the rocket attack, it was a signal to Turkey also from Iran by going after the KDP, or the KRG rather. And, of course, we have thousands of militia now pouring right into Sinjar. after the agreement that you and I spoke about in our last podcast. What do you make about this heightened Turkish-Iranian tension? Like, how is it morphing again? The situation for the Kurds right now in the region, whether it's the PKK or some of the other factions that we've been talking about.
Yeah, the thing of what's happening in Sinjar, which may be the manifestation of what's happening in the bigger region, is that, as you said, it's probably the rockets, were also a signal for Turkey. I agree with this assessment. Sinjar, the thing with Sinjar, it's geopolitically important for every actor who's involved, because Sinjar, first of all, it's very close to, it's basically the gate to Syria from the north. And also because Yazidis, given that they are very, very divided, they have unfortunately become a good tool for everyone to use them to enhance their own goals in this region. And so this, what's happening in Sinjar, I don't think there would be any direct, first of all, confrontation between pro-Iran militias and Turkey. That's unlikely, for at least from how I see things, because this will be basically a major escalation from both sides, which I don't think Turkey will risk, because before, even if Turkey has not sought Iraqi approval for their operations in Iraq, at least they tell them beforehand. They're like, you know what, we don't care if you approve or not, but at least we will have an operation so that you know what's happening. But in the case of Sinjar, it's more complicated, because basically it's controlled by Iraqi forces. You have Iraqi army there, you have Hashd al-Shabi, or Popular Mobilization Forces, pro-Iran militias. You have lots of Yazidi forces there as well. Some of them are pro-PKK, some of them are pro-Shia militias. And then you have KDP, who also have support among some Yazidis, but they don't have much, existence on the ground. So the situation will remain complicated for now, I think. And both Iran and Turkey are going to use it, obviously, to further their influence in the region. But at the end, they will try to find maybe some compromise. I don't know if that's possible at all, but I wouldn't expect a major escalation. I think for now, what will happen is that there would be no ground operation, but Turkey will increase its probably airstrikes, targeted airstrikes against certain targets in Sinjar.
Well, Abdullah, there's certainly a lot that I feel like we can continue to go with, but we're approaching the end of the program, so I would like to thank you for coming back on to Turkey Abroad, and we're going to continue to stay on top of all the developments here, and you're always going to be our go-to to help really just sort of make sense of all the noise. So again, I appreciate you for coming back onto the show.
Thank you, Nick.
My name is Nicholas Morgan, and this is Turkey Abroad.